The Lightning Thief by Riordan. Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. If you're reading this because you think you might be one, my advice is close this book right now. Believe whatever lie your mom or dad told you about your birth and try to lead a normal life. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Most of the time, it gets you killed in painful, nasty ways. If you're a normal kid reading this because you think it's fiction, great, read on. I envy you for being able to believe none of this ever happened. But if you recognize yourself in these pages, if you feel something stirring inside, stop reading immediately. You might be one of us. Once you know that, it's only a matter of time before they sense it too, and they'll come for you. Don't say I didn't warn you. My name is Percy Jackson. I'm 12 years old. Till a few months ago, I was a boarding student at Yancey Academy, a private school for troubled kids in upstate New York. Am I a troubled kid? Yeah, you could say that. I could start at any point in my short, miserable life to prove it, but things really started going bad last May when our 6th grade class took a field trip to Manhattan. 28 mental case kids and 2 teachers on a yellow school bus heading to Metropolitan
Museum of Art to look at ancient Greek and Roman stuff. I know, sounds like torture. Most Yancey field trips were.
But Mr. Brunner, our Latin teacher, was leading the trip, so I had hopes.
There's this middle-aged guy in a motorized wheelchair. He has thin hair and a scruffy beard and a frayed tweed jacket, which always smelled like coffee. You wouldn't think he'd be cool, but he told stories and jokes and let us play games in class. He had this awesome collection of Roman armor and weapons, so he was the only teacher whose class didn't put me to sleep.
I hope the trip would be okay. I hoped for once that I wouldn't get in trouble. Boy, I was wrong. See, bad things happen to me on field trips. Like, in my 5th grade school, when we went to the Saratoga battlefield, I had this accident with a Revolutionary War cannon. I wasn't aiming for the school bus, but of course I got expelled anyway. Before that, at my 4th grade school, when we took a behind-the-scenes tour of the Marine World Shark Pool, I sort of hit the wrong lever on the catwalk, and our class took an unplanned swim. And the time before that, well, you get the idea. This trip, I was determined to be good. All the way into the city, I put up with Nancy Bobofit, the freckly, red-headed kleptomatic girl, my best friend Grover, in the back of the head with chunks of peanut butter and ketchup sandwich. Grover's an easy target. He was scrawny. He cried when he got frustrated. He must have been held back several grades because he was the only 6th grader with acne and the start of a wispy beard on his chin. On top of all that, he was crippled. He had a note excusing him from PE for the rest of his life because he had some sort of muscular disease in his legs. He walked funny like every step hurt. But don't let that fool you. You should have seen him run when it was enchilada day in the cafeteria. Anyway, Nancy Bobofit was throwing wads of sand which had stuck in his curly brown hair, and she knew I couldn't do anything back to her because I was already on probation. The headmaster threatened me with death by in-school suspension if anything bad, embarrassing, or mildly entertaining happened on this trip. To kill her, I mumbled. Grover tried to call me dead. It's okay. I like peanut butter. He dodged another piece of his lunch. That's it. I started to get up, but Grover pulled me back to my seat. You're already on probation, he reminded me. You know who will get blamed if anything happens. Looking back on it, I wish I'd decked Nancy Bobofit right then and there. In-school suspension would have been nothing compared to the mess I was about to get myself into. Mr. Brunner led the museum tour. He rode up to the front in his wheelchair, guiding us through the big echo galleries past the marble statues and the glass case full of really old black and orange pottery. Blew my mind that this stuff had survived for 2,000, 3,000 years. Gathered us around a 13-foot tall stone column with a big on top and started telling us about how it was a grave marker stele for a girl about our age. He told us about the carvings on the sides. I was trying to listen to what he had to say because it was kind of interesting, but everybody around me was talking, and every time I told them to shut up, the other teacher chaperone, Mrs. Dodds, would give me the lie. Miss Dodds was this little math teacher from Georgia who always wore a black leather jacket even though she was 50 years old. She looked mean enough to ride a Harley right into your locker. She'd come to Yancey halfway through the year when our last math teacher had a nervous breakdown. The first day, Miss Dodds loved Nancy Bobofit and figured I was the devil's spawn. She'd point her crooked finger at me and say, "No, honey," real sweet, and I knew I was going to get after-school detention for a month. She made me erase answers out of old math workbooks until midnight, and I told Grover I didn't think Miss Dodds was human. He looked at me real serious and said, "You're absolutely right." Mr. Brunner kept talking about Greek funeral art. Nancy Bobofit snickered something about the naked guy on top of the stele, and I turned around and said, "Will you shut up?" That came out louder than I meant it to. The whole group laughed. Mr. Brunner stopped his story. "Mr. Jackson," he said, "did you have a comment?" My face was totally red. I said, no, sir. Brunner pointed to one of the pictures on the stele. Perhaps you'll tell us what this picture represents. I looked at the carving and felt a flush of relief because I actually recognized it. That's Cronus eating his kids, right? Yes, Mr. Brunner says, obviously not satisfied. And he did this because... Well, I racked my brain to remember. Cronus was the king god and... God? Mr. Brunner asked. Titan. I corrected myself and didn't trust his kids, who are the gods. So, Cronus ate them, right? But his wife hid baby Zeus and gave Cronus a rock to eat instead. And later, when Zeus grew up, he tricked his dad, Cronus, into barking up his brothers and sisters. Ew! One of the girls said. And so there was this big fight between the gods and the Titans, I continued, and the gods won. Some snickers from the group. Behind me, Nancy Boba Fett mumbled to a friend, like we're going to use this in real life, like it's going to say on our job application. Please explain why Cronus ate his kids. And, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Brunner said, to paraphrase Miss Boba Fett's excellent question, does this matter in real life? Busted, Grover muttered. Shut up, Nancy hissed, her face even brighter red than her hair. At least Nancy got packed too. Mr. Brunner was the only one who ever caught her saying anything wrong. He had radar ears. I thought a question shrugged. I don't know, sir. I see. Mr. Brunner looked disappointed. Well, half credit, Mr. Jackson. Zeus didn't feed Cronus a mixture of mustard and wine, which made him disgorge his other 5 children, who, of course, being immortal gods, had been living and growing up completely undigested in the Titan's stomach. Gods defeated their father, sliced him into pieces with his own scythe, and scattered his remains in Tartarus, the darkest part of the other room. On that happy note, it's time for lunch. Miss Dodds, would you lead us back outside? Class drifted off, the girls holding their stomachs, the guys pushing each other around and acting like doofuses. Grover and I were following when Mr. Brunner said, Mr. Jackson. I knew that was coming. I told Grover to keep going. Then I turned to Mr. Brunner. Sir? Mr. Brunner had this look that wouldn't let you go, and intense brown eyes that could have been 1,000-year-old and seen everything. Learn to answer my questions, Mr. Brunner told me. About the Titans? About real life, and how your studies apply to it. Oh. Learn from me, he said, is vitally important. I expect you to treat it as such. I will only accept the best from you, Percy Jackson. I wanted to get angry. This guy pushed me so hard. I mean, sure, it was kind of cool on tournament days when he dressed up in a Roman suit of armor and shouted, "What ho!" and challenged a sword point against the chalk, run to the board and name every Greek and Roman person who had ever lived, their mother, and what god they worshipped. Mr. Brunner expected me to be as good as everybody else, despite the fact that I have dyslexia and attention deficit disorder, and I had never made above a C- in my life. No, he didn't expect me to be as good. He expected me to be better. And I just couldn't learn all those names and facts, much less spell them correctly. I told something about trying harder, while Mr. Brunner took one sad look at the stele like he'd been at the girl's funeral. He told me to go outside and eat my lunch. Class was gathered on the front steps of the museum where we could watch the foot traffic along 5th Avenue. Overhead, a huge store was...
With clouds blacker than I'd ever seen over the city. I'd figured maybe it was global warming or something because the weather across New York State had been weird since Christmas. We had these massive snowstorms flooding in wildfires from lightning strikes. I wouldn't have been surprised if this was a hurricane blowing in. Nobody else seemed to notice. Some of the guys were pelting pigeons with Lunchable crackers. Nancy Boba Fett was trying to pickpocket something from a lady's purse, and of course, Miss Dodds wasn't seeing a thing.
Grover and I sat on the edge of the fountain, away from the others. We thought that maybe if we did that, everybody wouldn't know we were from that school. A school for loser frakes who couldn't make it elsewhere. Detention? Grover asked. Nah, I said, not from Brunner. I would just wish he'd lay off me sometimes. I mean, I'm not a genius. Grover didn't say anything for a while. Then, when I thought he was going to give me some philosophical comment to make me feel better, he said, "Can I have your app?"
I didn't have much of an appetite, so I let him take it. I watched the stream of cabs go down 5th Avenue and thought about my mom's apartment, only a little ways uptown from where we sat. I hadn't seen her since Christmas. I wanted so bad to jump in a taxi and head home. She'd hug me and be glad to see me, but she'd be disappointed in me too. She'd send me right back to Yancey and remind me that I had to try harder. Even if this was my 6th school in 6 years, I was probably going to get kicked out again. I wouldn't be able to stand the sad look she'd give me. Mr. Brunner parked his wheelchair at the base of the handicap ramp. He ate celery while he read a paperback novel. A red umbrella stuck up from the back of his chair, making it look like a motorized cafe table.
I was about to unwrap my sandwich when Nancy Boba Fett appeared in front of me with her ugly friends. I guess she'd gotten tired of stealing from tourists and dumped her half-eaten lunch in Grove's lap. Oops! She grinned at me with her crooked teeth. Her freckles were orange, as if somebody had spray painted her face with liquid Cheetos. I tried to stay cool. School counselor had told me 1,000,000 times, count to 10, get control of your temper. But I was so glad my mind went blank. A wave roared in my ears. I don't remember touching her. But the next thing I knew, Nancy was sitting on her butt in the fountain and screaming, "Percy pushed me!"
Dots materialized next to us. Suddenly, we're whispering, "Did you see the water? Like he grabbed her." I didn't know what they were talking about. All I knew was that I was in trouble again.
As soon as Mrs. Dodds was sure poor little Nancy was okay, promising to get her a new shirt at the museum, gift shop, etc., etc., Miss Dodds turned on me. There was a triumphant fire in her eyes, as if I'd done something she'd been waiting for all semester. "Now, honey," "I know," I grumbled, "a month of her workbooks." That wasn't the right thing to say. "Come with me," Mrs. Dodds said. "Wait," Grover yelped. "It was me. I pushed her." I stared at him stunned. I couldn't believe he was trying to cover for me. Mrs. Dodds scared Grover to death.
I looked at him so hard, his whisker chin trembled. "I don't think so, Mr. Underwood," she said, "but you will stay here." Grover looked at me desperately. "It's okay, man," I told him. "Thanks for trying." "Honey," Miss Dodds barked at me. "Now." Nancy Beaufort smirked. I gave her my deluxe "I'll kill you later" stare.
I turned to face Mrs. Dodds, but she wasn't there. She was standing at the museum entrance, way on top of the steps, gesturing impatiently for me to come.
"How'd you done there so fast?" Moments allow where my brain falls asleep or something, and the next thing I know, I've missed something as if a piece of the puzzle fell out of the universe and left me staring at the blank place behind it. The school counselor told me this was part of the ADHD, my brain misinterpreting things. I wasn't so sure. I went after Mrs. Dawes. Halfway up the steps, I glanced back at Grover. He was looking pale, cutting his eyes between me and Mr. Brunner like he wanted Mr. Brunner to notice what was going on. But Mr. Brunner was absorbed in his novel. I looked back. Miss Dodds had disappeared again. She was now inside the building at the end of the entrance hall. Okay, I thought she was going to make me buy a new shirt for Nancy at the gift shop. But apparently, that wasn't the plan. I followed her deeper into the museum, and when I finally caught up to her, we were back in the Greek and Roman section.
For us, the gallery was empty. Miss Dodds stood with her arms crossed from a big marble frieze of the gods. She was making weird noises in her throat like growling. Even without the noise, I would have been nervous. It was weird being alone with the teacher, especially Mrs. Dodds. Something about the way she looked at the frieze, like she wanted to surprise us. "You've been giving us problems, honey," she said. I did the same thing. I said, "Yes, ma'am." She tugged at the cuffs of her jacket. "Did you really think you would get away with it?" The look in her eyes was beyond mad. It was evil. "She's a teacher," I thought nervously. "It's not like she's going to hurt me." I'll try harder, ma'am." Thunder shook the building. "We're not fools, Percy Jackson. It was only a matter of time before we found you out. Confess and you will suffer less pain." I didn't know what she was talking about.
All I could think of was the teachers must have found the illegal stash of candy I'd been selling in my dorm room. Or they realized I got my essay on Tom Sawyer from the internet without ever reading the book, and now they were going to take away my grade, or worse, they were going to make me read the book.
"Well?" she demanded. "Ma'am, I don't—" "Your time is up," she hissed. And the weirdest thing happened. Her eyes began to glow like barbecue coals. Her fingers stretched, turning into talons. Her jacket melted into large leather wings. She wasn't human. She was a shriveling hag with bat wings and claws and a mouthful of yellow fangs, and she was going to slice me to ribbons. Things got even stranger. Mr. Brunner, who had been in front of the museum a minute before, wheeled his chair into the doorway of gallery, holding a pen in his hand. "Whoa, Percy!" he shouted, tossing the pen through the air. Miss Dodge lunged at me. With a yelp, I dodged and felt the talons slash the air next to my ear. I snatched the ballpoint pen out of the air, but when I hit my hand, it wasn't a pen anymore. It was a sword. Mr. Brunner's bronze sword, which she always used on tournament days. Miss Dodds spun towards me with a murderous look in her eye. My knees were jelly. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the sword. "Die, honey," she snarled. She flew straight at me. Absolute terror ran through my body. I did the only thing that came naturally. I swung the sword. The blade hit her in the shoulder and passed clean through her if she was made of water. Miss Dodds was a sandcastle and a power fan. She exploded into yellow power, vaporized on the spot, leaving nothing but the smell of sulfur and a dying screech and a chill of evil in the air, as if those two glowing red eyes were still watching me. I was alone. There was a ballpoint pen in my hand. Mr. Brunner wasn't there. Nobody was there but me. My hands were trembling. My lunch must have been contaminated with magic mushrooms or something. Had I imagined the whole thing? I went back outside. It had started to rain. Grover was sitting by the fountain in a museum tent over his head. Nancy Beaufort was there, still soaked from her swim in the fountain, grumbling to her elderly friends. When she saw me, she said, "I hope Miss Kerr whipped your butt." "Who?" "Our teacher." "Duh." I blinked. We had no teacher named Miss Kerr. I asked Nancy what she was talking about. She just rolled her eyes and turned away. I asked Grover where Mrs. Dodds was. He said, "Who?" But he paused at first. He wouldn't look at me, so I thought he was messing with me. "Not funny, man," I told him. "This is serious." Thunder boomed overhead. I saw Mr. Brunner sitting under his red umbrella reading his book as if he had never moved. I went over to him. He looked up a little distracted. "Ah, yes, that would be my pen. Please you bring your own writing utensils in the future, Mr. Jackson." I handed Mr. Brunner his pen, and I hadn't even realized I was still holding it. "Sir," I asked, "where's Mrs. Dodds?" He stared at me blankly. "The other chaperone." "Miss Dodds, the pre-algebra teacher." He frowned and sat forward, looking mildly concerned. "Percy, there's no Mrs. Dodds on this trip. As far as I know, there's never been a Mrs. Dodds at the Yancey Academy. Are you feeling all right?"